Welcome back, Chain Gang, to Top 5 Friday. So this is an idea that our Patreons initially came up with, and it's some of the posts on our Facebook page. We've had some discussions about it. We thought it might be a fun way to put some additional video content out there. And these top 5 lists are, right now we have 32. I'll put a list up there so you can see them. We have 32 lists. Some are sports like this week and next week, and some are not sports. The one we got the most votes for was the top 5 TV shows of all time. And we've had things like top 5 worst Academy Award, Best Picture decisions, that kind of thing. If you have a suggestion or one on our list as we have it so far that you want to see right away, just let us know. We definitely want to expand this to further ideas. But today's list is top 5 NBA players of all time, non-centers. I want to talk about why we're doing non-centers. Next Friday we'll do centers. A couple of reasons. Number one, it's easier for me. It's more comparing apples to apples when you're talking about non-centers. Centers have historically been an issue on these kinds of lists. Bill Simmons, who's probably the most famous of the basketball historians, he wrote this great book, Big Book of Basketball, I think it's called. He recently revised his list from that book and came up with the top 50 players of all time. But when he did it, he realized that a very disproportionate number of those players were centers. To me, okay, whatever, but to him, he decided to change the rules and make it 10 players from all 5 positions. The problem is that actually makes it not the 50 best players of all time. It's the 10 best players of all time at each position, and then you kind of shuffle them together like cards. Maybe that's a little harsh, but I thought this was kind of a better way to do it. If you suggest a list in the comments and we wound up doing that list, then we will give you a shout out, I should say. Today's list is a shout out to Kevin Merritt. Kevin Merritt is this great Domino's leader. He's so fantastic with his employees and team building, and he's a great family man. So he's the 2 things that I most admire probably. And, you know, Kevin is like probably most of the people watching this, that their impressions of how great players are is built mostly from SportsCenter. The problem with watching just highlights is it really builds up players like Allen Iverson, or I guess today it'd be Trae Young, and you know, I guess players like Kobe, and it de-emphasizes players that are very effective like Shaq, but maybe not quite as exciting and don't lend itself to highlights as much. And the other thing is that it gives value highlight-wise to very risky moves. There's a lot of great players who go for steals all the time because when you steal them, oh man, it can turn into an easy dunk at the other end, but you never see the highlights of when they miss the steal and the other team gets an easy basket. So I think it's important, if you really want to do social media posts and really want to talk about who's the greatest ever, to dive a little bit deeper than that. I think now's a really great time to do a list like this because there are so many great players today. I mean, you won't see Steph Curry or Kevin Durant on today's list, but if I doubled the size and made it top 10, you'd probably see both of them, or at least they'd get very close. And then you got players like Luka, like Joker, like Giannis, who could easily be top 5 players all time when they retired. They've started so strong. I'm going to give a lot of stats. I want you to know that when I give stats, it's always regular season and postseason combined. I mean, the postseason is obviously more important. I really don't understand why you rarely see those combined, but that's the best way to judge somebody's talent. The other thing I want to tell you about all these lists is I see, particularly sports lists in the morning when I'm at the gym, I see like people giving top 5 lists of all this kind of stuff, and they're always 100% sure of their choice, and they're always so enthusiastic about it. But the truth is that, and today's list is a good example, there's a lot of gray area. I am going to tell you when we make a list if there's another argument out there and I could be wrong. Like for instance, today I'm very secure in who's number 5, but number 6, you look at the discussions that we've had on our Facebook group, there's a lot of legitimate things. People suggest Tim Duncan. He's won 5 rings. He's, basically a player with no weaknesses. You talk about John Stockton. I mean, John Stockton is the only player who has led 2 of the 5 major statistical categories. He's the all-time leader in steals and assists, but he's also a very efficient scorer. And he also does well in the important analytics. Like analytics, people able to dive down mathematically has really changed sports evaluations. My 2 favorite statistics that combine all players' statistics, like one of them is win shares. I mean, the point is to win games. It doesn't really matter how you win the games as long as you win the games. And this combines your offensive, your defensive contribution, all of it. And it converts them into how does that translate into wins. In this numeric, John Stockton is number 8 all time for all positions. That includes centers. A lot of people say a better statistic is value over replacement player. That's true. The only flaw is that it only for players after 1973-74 season when they started to count all of the statistics and track blocks and stuff like that. But when you judge it since 1973-74, John Stockton's number 3 all time. I don't know anybody watching this that would have guessed that. Another suggestion is Karl Malone, top 10 all time in points and rebounds. When you rank him all time, he's also he's number 4 all time in win shares, which is just below, which is above Stockton, and he's number 4 all time in value over replacement player. That's just 1 slot ahead. So, I would say for the number 6 position, there's a lot of good arguments. That being said, I'm fairly confident Oscar Robertson is the 5 greatest player of all time. One of the things that Bill James does, he's a baseball historian, is when he ranks players, he separates peak value and career value. I think that's more important for baseball. You got players like Sandy Koufax that were arguably the greatest pitcher of all time, but they didn't play for very long, so they're probably out of the top 10 in terms of career value. It's less drastic in basketball with longer average careers, but I'd say if you're only saying career value, Stockton and Malone might edge in front of Oscar Robertson. But I would say they're far below Oscar when it comes to peak value. And it's not like Oscar Robertson had a short career. When he retired, he was up towards the top, I think 2nd or 3rd all time in scoring. He was by far had more rebounds than any guard ever, and he was number 1 in all positions in assists by a lot. So it's not like he had a short career. But the main reason that I feel confident that Oscar Robertson is number 5 is because if you look at the 3 statistics most people look at, the 3 abilities, I guess I should say, the ability to score, the ability to pass, the ability to rebound. His ability to pass is more dominant than anybody else's ability ever. And when I say dominant, I mean mostly you're looking at, okay, Oscar Robertson, I think most people agree, was the best passer of his era, the best passer of the 60s. What is the difference between Oscar Robertson and the 2nd greatest passer at the time? I feel like the difference for Oscar Robertson is larger than anybody else. When you look at passing, say, let's compare him to LeBron. When you're trying to make somebody look good by comparing to LeBron, I think that alone says something. But when LeBron has a 3-point shooter at one end, and in some cases he's had him sitting in both corners, his assist numbers just seem hard to believe for a guy playing forward. And the reason is pretty simple. He would drive to the basket, and if they don't converge on him, he scores easily. But if they do, which they do a lot because he's one of the 2 best closers in the history of the game, He just dishes it out to one end to the other. And if that scorer is effective, that three-point shot, his numbers look incredible. They drop considerably. Look at this season, 2022-23, or last season, 2020-21-22. His assist numbers drop off. They still look great, but nothing like the previous season when he led the entire league in assists. The reason is because he doesn't have that knockdown three-point shooter. Want to know how many seasons Oscar Robertson had a great three-point shooter? I mean, obviously 0. There was no three-point line. There were no three-point shots back then. And that would have made him look way better statistically. Not just in scoring, because he has the option of shooting from three-point range, but he didn't have that dish that everybody had. Now, the counter to this is, well, when Oscar Robertson played, a lot of assists were racked up by dipping it into your big man. It's easy to get assists if you had Wilt, or Kareem. You dip it into them, they turn around, place the ball easily in the basket, and bang! If they didn't put it on the floor, you got an assist. Oscar Robertson didn't have that for almost all of his career. He played for the Cincinnati Royals. Are you aware that the Cincinnati Royals even existed? Yeah, they did, and he played almost his entire career with them. Now, one of the reasons why I'm confident that he would have played so much better if he would have had I think the three-point element is pretty obvious, but would have had a big man is, at the end of his career, even though he's the best player the Cincinnati Royals ever had by a million miles, his statistics were dropping off, and they traded him to Milwaukee. And Milwaukee had Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. All of a sudden, Oscar Robertson was contributing to the best total offensive effectiveness of his entire career because he got to dip it into Kareem. How effective were they? They were 14.5 points better than their opponents in the playoffs. Playing playoff teams, the only teams you get to play in the playoffs, 14.5 points above. There were times when Cincinnati was a little bit better and was able to make the playoffs, but they were always like 1 point above, sometimes 1 point below. And then he gets a big man, and all of a sudden, he's a god. So imagine what his statistics would be like if he had the three-point line, or a center like Kareem, or both. So he was the greatest passer ever, but what Oscar's most known for is he was great at everything. I think everybody knows Oscar Robertson is the first person to ever average a triple-double for his career. Here's the much more impressive statistic when we're evaluating careers like I am. Over his first 5 seasons, he averaged a 30-point triple-double. 30-point triple-double. 30.3 points, 10.4 rebounds, 10.6 assists. The knock on him is that as that happened each year, his statistics dropped off until he ran into Kareem at the end of his career. That's true. So let's look at how much they dropped off for Oscar Robertson. The following season after that 5-year run, he had 31.3 points. So his points actually went up. 11.1 rebounds, those went up. 11.1 assists and 7.7 rebounds. Okay. Then he dropped off a little more. 30.5 points, 10.7 assists, 6.2 rebounds. And then the absolutely dreadful season of 29.2 points, 9.7 assists, and 6 rebounds. You understand that those seasons fit very comfortably in the absolute Mount Rushmore GOATs of all time. So when your falling off numbers would look just fine on the back of a basketball card of all the greatest players of all time, that's pretty impressive. Okay, number 4 is Larry Bird. You could argue that Big O and Larry Legend should be swapped. I'm not going to do that. The argument would be Larry Bird has one of the shortest careers of any of the all-time greats. And as a matter of fact, if you watch all the sports videos we wind up making, that will still be true. But you just had to be there, and I was. I mean, when he had played only 8 seasons, Sports Illustrated came up with an article that argued that he was the greatest player who had ever lived after only 8 seasons. They went to Red Auerbach for a counter view. Red Auerbach is famous for saying that Bill Russell was 10 times better than Wilt Chamberlain. That's nutty, but that's how much he loved Bill Russell. And after just 8 seasons, he agreed that Larry Bird should surpass him, and Larry Bird is the greatest player of all time. Now, to be fair to people like, MJ, MJ still had plenty of titles to go, but that's impressive. Let's talk about MJ a little bit. Jordan's most famous night was when he set the all-time record for points in a playoff game. He scored 63 to beat Jerry West's record. I believe it's 61. Don't have it written down. And he did it against Larry Bird in the playoffs. Larry Bird's team, I should say. What gets lost in that story, and it's just kind of barely mentioned as a aside, is that the Bulls didn't even win that game. Well, Larry was not as good as he was offensively that game. He had 36 points. But Larry was passed the ball better. He had 8 assists and had more than twice as many rebounds. He had 12 rebounds. The Celtics didn't just win that game. They won the whole series. They swept the Bulls. The reason why I think that game is historically important is not because it is the highest scoring game that anybody's ever had in the playoffs. It's that was the game that I believe Michael Jordan realized that despite what the SportsCenter highlights say, he needs to add things to his game if he's going to go down as the greatest of all time, which would have been and still is the only acceptable notion for Michael Jordan, as it should be. They asked Larry after the game, do you agree now that Michael Jordan is the best player in the NBA? And you could tell by the look on Larry's face, he did not agree. He kind of looked down and to the left, and he did say he's the most awesome and exciting player. And as people know, MJ did not take kindly to that, even though it's a big compliment. But when MJ was alone in his hotel, he had to realize that he was not the most valuable player on that court, and he's probably only the 3rd most valuable player in the NBA at that time. So that brings us to the number 3 player, who was also more valuable than Michael at that time. You might wonder why. I mean, this person certainly barely jumped, certainly couldn't jump more than MJ. He wasn't as strong as MJ. He wasn't as fast. He wasn't as athletic. So how could he possibly be better? He was magic. Literally magic. Now, if you haven't watched full games of Magic, maybe you don't understand, but Larry Bird sure did. You might think, oh, Bird's an egomaniac. Why didn't he say MJ was the best? Well, in 1990, he had absolutely no problem saying that Earvin Magic Johnson was the best player in the world. And when you see him say it, this is not somebody being nice in a press conference. I have never heard a more genuine thing said in a press conference in any sports game in my entire life. Watch the press conference of him saying that Magic's the best. It is so deflating to think that you can win any game you want by sheer will, and all of a sudden you're playing a game against a guy who thinks the same thing. In 1993, Bird retired early because of injuries, and he was asked who's the best player he ever played against. He said Magic Johnson is by far the best player he's ever played against, and he played countless games against MJ and Magic. Now, listen, spoiler alert, I do have MJ higher than Magic on this list, as I think most people do. MJ had 3 NBA titles to go after 1993, so it certainly doesn't, surprise me that Bird said at the time, but it is still very impressive considering how athletic MJ was. How do you see the big Magic Johnson, Larry Bird debate? Used to be the biggest one. It surpassed Russell Chamberlain and now has maybe fallen below the LeBron MJ debate. But, why do I have Magic ahead of Bird? Magic wound up passing Oscar Robertson for most assists all time. Now, of course, John Stockton is way ahead of him. Him and Bird both won 3 regular season MVPs. Bird won 2 finals MVPs, Magic won 3. You could argue Bird should have won all 3, but the counter to Magic being number 1 is he only averaged 19.5 points a game to go with his 11.2 assists. But Magic was an incredibly efficient scorer, 53.3 effective field goal percentage. Magic did win 5 NBA titles. But the thing about Magic is he is the player who, him and Bill Russell are the 2 players who their worth is so much higher than their statistics show. And I would put Magic number 1 now that we have an evaluation of the defensive statistics and we understand Russell's value a lot more than we did previously. And also, I watched it happen. Everybody said all the time, if Magic wanted to score 30 points a game, he could. And that's statistically undeniable. The evidence that they use is, of course, Game 7 of the 1985 finals. But I want people to understand just how drastic that game was. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was the reigning MVP from that season. In fact, he'd won, I think, 6 MVPs over the last 10 years. I don't have that in front of me, but you can look it up. Clearly, the greatest player of the previous decade. There's no argument about that. And Kareem was down. So we have a lot of situations where centers have been injured and a power forward has moved to center. This is a situation where a guard moved to center. And that's a daunting prospect, which I'm sure changed the odds on that game pretty drastically. And then Magic had arguably the greatest game that had ever been played, at least not by Wilt, up until that point. Magic was still determined to get everybody else involved, even though his best teammate was out of the game. So he only took 22 shots, but he did score 42 points. Of course, he took a lot of fouls because he was playing center. He had 15 rebounds, taking over the center duty there. He did have 7 assists and 3 steals, so he basically did it all. But the real story on that was not statistical, how amazing he was. They were only ahead by 2 points with 5 minutes to go, and so the assist stopped. But what couldn't be stopped was Magic. He just took over the game. The final score was 123-107. And then they get to this press conference, Magic having arguably the greatest game of all time, and all he did was talk about his teammates. He was playing for not just that NBA title, he was playing to see how many NBA titles that he could win, period, by building up his teammates at that time. I was, fortunate enough to live in Los Angeles for 3 of Magic's seasons. And I watched almost every single game. And one of the things that I would notice is early in the game, he would make what I thought were bad decisions. Decisions where he could back down a player. Check out the finals and watch Magic and Bill Walton's stunned commentary. How is Magic cooking Michael Jordan in the post? Magic was a great post-up player. But in situations where I felt like he could just kind of work a guy down and lay it up, he would pass it a lot of the times. And, but what I didn't realize is Magic is like, I need to build a team. I know that we have to be the number 1 seed in the West, but if I have to sacrifice a lot of my points and occasionally a game or 2, as long as we can still be the number 1 seed, I'm going to do it because there's only one statistic that matters to me. Am I the guy holding the trophy in the last game of the year, Game 7 of the finals, or the final game of the finals? So he would make those decisions. Here's the most drastic one. There was a game where Michael Cooper was their 3-point threat, and he had a pretty bad game for him. And he was really down in the locker room. And then the next game, Magic decides to just start feeding this guy, and he's even worse. I'm screaming at the TV, get Coop out of that blank game. I don't want this video to get censored, but it would if there was actual video of me doing that. And I just didn't understand it. There's Worthy. Hey, you can get to the hoop. And then towards the end, but Magic, not only did he not seem to notice, he just didn't scorn him, he didn't do anything. And then at the end of the game, he passes it to Cooper. The game was out of reach at that point. The Lakers were gonna win. And Cooper finally hits a shot, and Magic acts like he hit the game winner in Game 7. Embraces him the whole 9 yards. And I realized that Magic was making an investment. He was investing, having his shots look terrible analytically for getting the only statistic he gave a crap about. He knew better. How did he know better? I don't know. Yeah, he was Magic. That's how he knew better. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about probably the biggest gray area, maybe in all of sports. Let me ask you a question. I'm gonna ask you a question. I want you watching this video to answer. How confident are you that you know who the first and the second person are gonna be on my list of greatest non-centers? How confident would you be if this was simply a list of the greatest players that they would be the same two players? I'll wait. Right. Okay, you got it right. It's Michael Jordan and LeBron James. It's weird. I think everybody agrees those are the two greatest players of all time, unless you're like really a MJ hater, really a LeBron hater, and you want to say something meaningless. You would have to say something that's just ignorant to make that point. But in general, people agree these are 1 and 2. But what's weird is, even though that's such a consensus, everybody who has an opinion on it seems to think it's not even close. MJ's 1,000 times better than LeBron, or LeBron's 1,000 times better than MJ. I see these posts on social media where they'll post some picture of a stat. It's just this cherry-picked stat. And of course, if that was the only stat that one could measure, it would be a slam dunk. And I'm just going to tell you the truth. It's not a slam dunk. There are great arguments for both of these players being the greatest player who's ever walked on the court. And I'm not going to cop out. I'm not going to say it's a tie, but I'm going to tell you who I think it is, but I am going to make the argument for both. I assume, based on mostly marketing, but a lot of reasons, that most people would pick Michael Jordan as number 1. So I'm going to start with, I guess, the harder argument, which is LeBron. But in a way, it's not harder, because if you are not cherry-picking statistics, or if you are using advanced analytics, if you are using all of the statistics available to you, it is impossible to make an argument that Michael Jordan deserves to be ranked ahead of LeBron James. I'm going to talk about it. Once again, I'm combining regular and postseason. Let's first talk about scoring. LeBron has more points than anybody in the history of the league. Jordan's number 5. I consider Jordan a better scorer. Jordan's has, one of the reasons is he has a higher points per game. I could see the argument that LeBron deserves to be ranked higher career-wise, but if you ask me, Jordan deserves to be ranked slightly ahead of him as a scorer. Assists. LeBron James is number 5 all time. Jordan is number 37. Rebounds. LeBron is number 25 all time. Jordan's number 104. Triple doubles. LeBron is number 4 all time with 135. And Jordan is number 19 with 30. So LeBron has him by over 100 there. I would say that Jordan's a slightly better scorer. LeBron is, without question, a better passer, and he is a better rebounder. But let's dive into advanced metrics. Win shares, we talked about earlier. It's all about winning. It doesn't matter how you get there. LeBron is number 1 all time. Jordan's number 5. Value over replacement player, I consider that a more accurate statistic for players after comparing players after 1973-74 season. LeBron is number 1 and Jordan is number 2. Now, Bill Simmons is the most famous basketball analyst ever, and he says that Michael Jordan is number 1, and just the fact that he says it, that counts. But when you talk about statistically, Bill Simmons gets backlash for feeling that he's emotional, which obviously I can't criticize him because I got emotional just talking about, E. But he came up with what he felt was the ultimate statistical ranking, and maybe it is. He took 32 different metrics, not just value over replacement, not just win shares, but player efficiency, box plus minus, how people were voted in the MVP race, which I think is great. All the offensive and defensive statistics, he tried to balance them so it didn't weigh one more. And you see the list up here. A lot of times people come up with what they think is a great mathematical formula for ranking players, but then when you see the list, you're like, well, there must be something wrong with that list because it doesn't make any sense that this guy would be here. But if you look at Bill Simmons' list, it looks pretty effective. But it's not one of these situations where an evaluator manipulated statistics to justify his ranking, because he has LeBron at number 1, and he has LeBron at number 1 by a lot. There is an impression that most big stars step it up in the playoffs. Both of these guys really did. By the way, it's not true. Most players get worse in the playoffs because they're only playing playoff teams. So they're not padding their stats, working the worst team in the leagues. But that's going to be a big factor in not just comparing them against each other, but why I have them both at number 1 and number 2. Let's talk about LeBron in the playoffs. He is the only person that has ever led both teams in points, rebounds, and assists in the finals. And Jordan's done it twice. And the second time he did it, listen to this. He had to do this because he was facing what people thought at the time was the greatest team in the history of the NBA, the 2016 Golden State Warriors. He led both teams, his team and the Warriors, in points, rebounds, assists, steals, and blocks. I'm gonna let that sit in. Now, if you follow NBC Sports, you know that they love Michael Jordan, and who wouldn't? Any media outlet, Jordan is the best for hits and ratings and all that. So they decided to expand it a little so Jordan could be part of that praise. And they made a list of people who scored 450% in the finals on all 5 statistics. So in other words, if you led in points, as Jordan always did, that's 100%. If you averaged 8 rebounds a game and the person who was number 1 averaged 10, you got an 80% score. So they would take your statistics and they made a list of the people that got 450%. It wouldn't surprise you that, sure enough, Jordan and LeBron are the only people that have done that more than once in the finals. Jordan did it twice. LeBron did it twice at 500% and 6 times. 6 times scored over 450% in the finals with both teams. That's astonishing. And in a nutshell, that statistic would be the difference maker if I was going to rank LeBron as the greatest player who ever lived. However, and it's not an insult, I have LeBron at number 2. Now, why do I have MJ after all that at number 1? I told you I was going to make both arguments, and here's the argument for MJ. I want you to finish this video. I don't want you to switch over, but there is a page, Thinking Basketball on YouTube, which I guess I shouldn't be plugging, but it is the best YouTube page in terms of, and podcast, in terms of breaking down the minutia of game films and why this person is so good, breaking down the teeniest little frog hair of statistic. And they actually do something like Bill James does with baseball. They separate career value and peak value. In peak value, they consider it your best 8-year peak. And not surprisingly, they have Michael Jordan as having the highest peak of any player ever. And they have LeBron at number 2 and Kareem at number 3. I guess the argument for LeBron is he actually had 2 8-year peaks. So in terms of peak value, LeBron is both the second best player of all time and the 4th, which obviously leads to LeBron being number 1 in their career value rankings. Kareem might surprise you as number 2 unless you think about how many seasons he played, but Jordan's a distant 3. So how in heck can I have Jordan number 1? Well, I get it. Jordan's not like Wilt or, Kareem or Larry Bird. Like the first season they ever played, they were the best player in. LeBron wasn't, and neither was Jordan. But the thing about it is that once MJ became the best player, he wasn't just the best player in the league, he was the best player who ever played, and I feel like that run was long enough to say that he beats LeBron. My argument is not going to be statistic-based, but I do want to talk about a couple of statistics that do favor Jordan. As I said, here's the one why I think Jordan's a better scorer. Not because he averaged more points a game, because LeBron has so many more total points that I don't think that convinced me. What convinces me is adjusted scoring rate in the playoffs. The reason why adjusted scoring rate is important is, you can't compare how many points Michael Jordan scored when there were 80 possessions per game, and Jerry West, who's an incredible postseason player, obviously, scored when there's 125 points a game, or the same thing's true for Wilt. You have to adjust these rates for the era in which they played. Jordan is not just number one, but if you separate the postseason performances and make a list, Jordan has the best season ever and the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, and ninth best. So in other words, 9 times the 9 most dominant scoring performances in the history of the playoffs were all one guy. That is a Wayne Gretzky type performance. Now, there are things more important than scoring, but that is such a dominant statistic that I think it's the most impressive career statistic that any player at any position holds. Another thing is player efficiency rating. It's more of a peak value statistic, obviously. Nikola Jokic is number 2 all time, but MJ is number 1 all time, despite the fact that his career is over, and LeBron is number 3 all time. But the reason why I picked Jordan is not statistical. It comes from watching the games. Jordan is one of 3 players that when I was watching their playoff run, I thought to myself, you can sit down in front of a camera or in front of a typewriter and break down this matchup any way you want. None of it matters. Michael Jordan is going to be the NBA championship, and it doesn't matter how he does it. He's just going to find a way to do it. I've thought that 3 players had extended runs of that. And the reason why I don't have LeBron at number 1 is LeBron's not one of those 3 players. The 3 players were Michael Jordan, Larry Bird, and Magic Johnson. You might say to yourself, well, wait a minute. Jordan won all his finals and Bird and Magic. Well, most of the reason why Bird and Magic didn't win all their finals is they were playing each other, as I mentioned earlier. I did feel that way about LeBron in 2016, but that was the only time I felt it. In my heart, LeBron has won 4 finals MVPs, and people do analytics, think it's the most insane thing ever that he didn't win the finals MVP, a 5th time where he led in all the categories, and MJ's won 6 MVPs. But that's not the thing that matters. To me, he deserved to win those MVPs, but that's different from knowing that they are so valuable that no matter what, they're going to be the NBA champion. The most important barometer in sports is the impact you have on winning a championship. But in team sports, it's not black and white. You can't take a list of you look at Bill Simmons' list of the, top players, and it looks like the top players. If you take a list of the players with the most rings, that is not a good list of the best players of all time. Robert Horry has 7 rings. Charles Barkley has 0. Robert Horry is not even close to the player that Charles Barkley is. Great clutch shooter. I'm not saying anything bad about Big Game Bob, but it's not even close. Trent Dilfer is not better than Dan Marino, etc., etc., etc. It's just that, so it's not like I'm blind to championships as a lot of people are. But I happen to be of the age where I saw all of MJ, Bird, Jordan, and LeBron's run. If I had to rank how impressive each performance was in the finals, I would say MJ's 1993 performance was the most impressive I've ever seen. This is not statistical basis, just watching it. I would say the second most impressive is LeBron in 2016. But then the next 5 I would rank would all be Michael. And then if I'm just doing MJ and LeBron, I would put LeBron's. And that is, in a nutshell, why Michael Jordan is the greatest player who ever lived. I want to say one last thing. Well, I guess 2 last things. One is, hey, LeBron's still playing. He's still playing at an elite level. He is certainly the best player in season 20 that there's ever been. And it is possible that LeBron could run into that situation where he has a spot-up, dead three-point shooter and add another title, and that might change the rankings. But as of now, MJ's the GOAT. When I do these videos in general, I am going to address an entry that I feel that the viewers might think should be on the list, but I absolutely do not agree. And in this case, it's not the people who were mentioned before. It's not Tim Duncan or John Stockton or Karl Malone or Jerry West. I think the person that the most people will comment should be on this list that isn't is Kobe Bryant. Obviously, I'm of an age where I saw an enormous amount of Kobe's games, particularly when he was with the Lakers, because I'm a Lakers fan. I agree, Kobe should be a first ballot Hall of Famer. He's athletically gifted, he's very intense, he's an excellent team defender. Lately, some analysis of game film has shown a lot of instances where people are kind of blowing by him when he's an on-ball defender because he didn't have the explosiveness that like an MJ had, but I don't think that means he was an elite defender, maybe just overrated at the time. But he's a great player. I'll just never forget that gif of Matt Barnes throwing the basketball at Kobe and Kobe not flinching. Kobe's just super cool. He deserves to be ranked high, maybe the 12th or 13th best non-center ever, and here's why. He's just not an efficient offensive player. He had 25 points. Scoring was his ballywick. He had averaged 5.2 rebounds and 4.7 assists. That's really good. I want to point out it's far less than the players that we've been talking about so far, but it's still really 25, 5, and almost 5. That's very good. But the problem is that it was far less efficient as an offensive player than everybody else. I had a friend of mine tell me that he felt that Kobe was better than Shaq, which is like indefensible, and he followed up by saying he's better than LeBron. What? And when I said, oh, well, did you know that Kobe averaged less than 45% shooting for his entire career? He was like, well, yeah, but when it counted in the playoffs, he turned into the Black Mamba. Black Mamba for life, baby. Except it's just not true. I know a lot of people think that. It's just not true. In the postseason, his rebounds and assists didn't get better. Actually, they were a little bit worse. And his shooting, well, Kobe obviously was in the postseason a lot. How many seasons would you guess? I'm going to ask you this question. How many seasons would you guess that the Black Mamba stepped up and made more than half his shots in the postseason? How many? I'll give you a clue. It's the same amount of seasons as he made over half his shots in the regular season. 0. Is it hard to make more than half your shots? Absolutely. But, with Kobe, what was frustrating of watching him, particularly with the Lakers, is he would take these 19, 20, 21-yard jumpers when Shaq was in the post. And that's just a decision that really hurts your team offensively. There's the argument that Kobe was the best bad shot maker ever. I get it, but that only works if statistically it turns into efficiency. Michael Jordan wasn't as good at bad shots on tape because Michael Jordan had much better explosiveness and body control, so he got himself in a position to take better shots. He had his shoulders square to the basket. He was much better at doing that. Why should he have tossed it to Shaq? Well, how many times during the postseason do you think that Shaq made over half his shots? Kobe was at 0, Shaq was at 16. 16. So Kobe was a great player, but to say he should have been on this list means that your only knowledge of Kobe is the highlight. Sorry, Kevin, love you. You're awesome. It's just an undeniable truth. Okay, so next week, we are going to do the top 5 centers of all time. And what we do after that will depend on your comments. You saw the list at the beginning of the video. Let me know what list you'd like to see, and we'll get it to you. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and we will see you next time on The Board Chain.